In our last lecture we began to observe the beginning of Jesus' Galilean ministry, as he healed the nobleman's son, declared himself to be the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy, the healing of those with evil spirits and illnesses, and the dedicated following of Peter, Andrew, James, and John. In this lecture we will continue with Jesus' Galilean ministry as he heals a leper, a paralytic, calls Matthew the tax collector to follow him, teaches on fasting and the Sabbath, and continues to heal many more as his first year of ministry comes to a close. The Gospel of Matthew tells us that Jesus continued in his Galilean ministry, teaching in the synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom. Accompanying his message and teachings were his miracles of healing the sick and diseased, those possessed with evil spirits, others who were lunatics, and others with palsy. Because of this, many people followed who came from the regions of Galilee, Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and even from beyond the Jordan. One of the events during this time as people followed him was a man with leprosy approaching Jesus. Kneeling down before him, he asks Jesus to heal him by claiming, "If you will, you can make me clean." Moved with compassion for the man, Jesus touches the leper and declares him clean, at which point the man's leprosy is healed and removed. Jesus then instructs the healed to tell no one, but rather go to the priest and offer sacrifices in accordance with the law of Moses as a testimony. The healed leper seems to do the exact opposite, going and telling the people what Jesus had done, and causing more fame to spread and more people coming to him to be healed and to learn. Because of this, Jesus was not able to enter the city, so he moves to the desert places so he could pray, although people still came to him there also. Shortly after this event, Jesus enters a ship and sails back to Capernaum, and due to many rumors, many people began to gather where he stayed and preached. While in the house, some people bring a man with palsy to Jesus so that he may be healed, but seeing no way to get through the crowd, the people go up on the roof and make a hole to get the man access to Jesus. Seeing their faith, Jesus turns to the man and tells him to be happy, for his sins are forgiven. Seemingly hearing this claim of forgiveness, the scribes began to complain in their hearts that Jesus was blaspheming, since only God could forgive sins. Knowing their thoughts, Jesus responds to them by asking them questions: why they think evil in their hearts, and if it is easier to forgive sins or to tell the man to pick up his bed and walk. In order to show them that he, the Son of Man, had the power and authority to forgive sins, he turns to the man and commands him to take up his bed and walk. The man then proceeds to stand, take up his bed, and walks home in front of them all, causing the people to marvel and glorify God and his power. Traveling once again by the seaside as crowds of people followed him, he continues to teach them. During this time, he sees and passes by a man named Matthew, also known as Levi, sitting at the receipt of customs as a tax collector. Approaching him, Jesus beckons him to follow after him, at which point Matthew leaves all and follows Jesus as one of his devoted disciples. After his calling, Matthew holds a great feast for Jesus at his house where many publicans and sinners attended, along with Jesus and his disciples. The scribes and Pharisees then question Jesus' disciples and ask why they eat with known sinners and publicans. Jesus is the one who responds to them by telling them that it is those who are sick who need a physician, not those who are well. He then instructs them to go learn what it means that he will have mercy and not sacrifice, and that he came to call sinners to repent and not the righteous. After these events, we are told that the disciples of John come to Jesus and ask why his disciples do not fast like they and the Pharisees do so often with prayer, but rather they eat and drink. Jesus then gives an example by way of wedding guests and a bridegroom, asking them how the guests can mourn while the bridegroom is with them, explaining that they would not be fasting as long as he is present. Rather, they fast once the bridegroom is taken, and they will fast when that day comes. Further explaining his lesson, Jesus then uses two more examples by way of cloth and another by wineskins. He explains that a person does not sew unshrunk cloth on an old garment when repairing it, since it will pull away from the garment and make the tear even worse, since it will not match the old. In the same manner, you do not use old wineskins to store new wine, because it will cause the wineskins to burst and ruin the wine. Instead, you pour new wine into new wineskins so that both are preserved. Also, when people drink the wine, they desire the old above the new because they perceive the old wine as better. As a Sabbath day approaches, Jesus and his disciples apparently are going through a field, and being hungry they begin to pick and eat the kernels. The Pharisees, seeing this, begin to complain that it is not lawful to do this during the Sabbath. Jesus responds by sharing with them an Old Testament story regarding King David. that when David and his followers had entered the house of God during the days of Abiathar the high priest and were hungry, they were given the showbread to eat, which was not lawful for them to eat, since it was only for the priests. Further explaining that the priests also profane the temple on the Sabbath, and they are considered blameless. But there is one greater than the temple present. However, if they would have understood that God desires mercy and not sacrifice, they would not have condemned the guiltless. Jesus explains they did not understand the Sabbath correctly, for the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, and that the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, thus declaring his authority to do as he did. Departing from there, he later enters a synagogue and begins to teach when Jesus encounters a man who has a withered hand. The scribes and Pharisees watch him to observe if he would heal someone on the Sabbath so as to have a reason to accuse him of breaking the law, even going so far as to ask him if it is lawful to heal on the Sabbath. Knowing their thoughts, he tells the man with the withered hand to stand up as he replies to them, asking who among them would not rescue their own sheep from falling in a pit if it was the Sabbath. Is not a man more valuable than a sheep? He continues by asking them several questions. Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? To do good or evil? To save life or to kill? But the people hold their peace as Jesus is angered and grieved for the hardness of their hearts. Focusing back on the man, Jesus commands him to stretch out his hand, and as the man does so, he is healed, and his hand restored as the other. This caused the leaders to be filled with madness, and the Pharisees hold a council so as to find a way to destroy Jesus, going as far as colluding with the Herodians to find a way. Knowing what they were conspiring to do against him, Jesus withdraws himself with his disciples and heads to the sea. Great multitudes of people continued to follow him as they heard what great things he had done, coming from the regions of Galilee, Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, Tyre, Sidon, and from beyond the Jordan. And with the crowds pressing on him to touch him, he healed them all, including many with plagues and those with unclean spirits, who would fall and cry out that he was the Son of God, but Jesus commanding them not to make him known. And as a way to get a break from the crowds thronging him, he and his disciples would enter a small ship to break from the crowds. All that Jesus had done would be the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy, that Jesus would be the servant of God, chosen, beloved, in whom his soul was well pleased. That the Lord would put his Spirit on him, and he shall show judgment to the Gentiles, and he would not strive nor cry, nor have his voice heard in the streets. He will not break a bruised reed, nor would he quench a smoking flax, until he sends judgment unto victory, and in his name the Gentiles would trust. And with that we see the closing of Jesus' first year in ministry. Reviewing, we observed upon his return from Samaria he begins ministry in Galilee, preaching and healing many who were ill and possessed with evil spirits, including the nobleman's son and Peter's mother-in-law. He then calls Peter, Andrew, James, and John to leave all and follow him in ministry, where he continues to heal many, and eventually calls Matthew the tax collector to leave all and follow him as well. Teaching clarity on fasting, the Sabbath, and doing good. We end his first year of ministry with his healing of great multitudes and his fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy. In our next lecture we will begin with Jesus' second year in ministry, beginning with the choosing of his 12 apostles and perhaps the most prominent sessions of his teachings, the Sermon on the Mount.